Hi, everybody. For those of you that I've not met, I'm Ben, founder of Rare, and today I'll be taking you through ways of thinking about improving your sales efficiency with data. Some of this is based on work we've done with clients over the years. Some of it's based on products that we've got live in the market. So hopefully there'll be something in here for everybody. So hopefully what you'll benefit from today will be an understanding of how to use data better to target clinics that are right for your business. We're a data business, and we help our clients prioritize their prospects and develop their market activity. And we do that by various means. We are tracking what consumers want in the private healthcare market, and we're looking at what the service providers are offering across many aspects of the private healthcare industry. And ultimately, there's four things I would hope people would come away with, and that's four principles of helping to improve sales and to sort of think about your commercial strategies. Going back to simply, what do healthcare professionals need? You know, why would we speak to them? What do they want from us? How can we better support them? Understanding the principles of market capacity. So, you know, if you're encouraged to try and push sales in particular areas, then, you know, what's a realistic sort of target? What could you possibly achieve using some of the principles I'll talk through today? We'll also talk a bit about trends, and then how you can bring different data sets together to understand, you know, what clinics are doing, what they're offering, and what the size of their available market is. So kind of four things we'll cover. It's not an exhaustive list. It's really just demonstrating how you can use different data points to improve your commercial strategies. So as I mentioned, we'll start off with just a very basic question, going back to, you know, I suppose the foundation of all of this, which is, as those that support the healthcare industry, you know, how can we better support HCPs in their endeavours with their clinics and with their clients in consultation? The thing to think about within the private market ultimately goes back to the basics. You know, these are people who have commercial pressures. They are running businesses at the end of the day. And when we've done research into this part of the market, what you see is there's a huge variation in terms of what people need and the sort of support that they are looking for from manufacturers. 86% of all practices in medical aesthetics are single owner operated. So the vast majority are just one person who's got a room and got a handful of clients. Typically what you find, as you can see in the data there, these individuals are more about kind of legal requirements, latest rules and regulations. They've got a small client book. They're really happy to kind of maintain their list. They're quite happy sort of running their sort of smaller practices. They do need support when it comes to acquiring new patients and online marketing and training support. You see across the different size criteria that we've got there, the bigger the organization, the more there is a need to actually get more clients through the door, to get more support with marketing, get more support with business strategy and raising their profile in the local area. Really important to kind of take a step back and realize that every time you speak to a different clinician or practice manager, etc., every clinic's different. They've all got different needs. Yes, there are some similarities in how they operate, but ultimately it's taking a bit of a step back and recognizing that if we really want to kind of better support them, we have to recognize them all as being different to each other, and they've all got different priorities and issues to think about. So it's worthwhile profiling the size of the clinics that you work with to kind of, and use this kind of basic principle of, you know, the sort of sizes. Second principle is around, well, all right, we've understood what they need, but what's the likely outcome? We know within the medical aesthetics market in the UK, that roughly 1 in 5 people are thinking about having some form of treatment at some point. So we know that it's a sizable market. It's worth £3 billion a year. So it's pretty sizable. It's the size of Chelsea Football Club. And we've got 7.9 million who are actively having treatment at any time. So it's a real sizable market. In terms of the supply, for regulated clinics, so those that fall under the CQC, RQIA, HIS and CIW frameworks, we've got 6,500 practices that are serving that 7.9 million that I mentioned. But then, of course, everybody's chasing the 13.2. You know, this is really where the opportunity is within the market. We believe, and this really does depend on your definition, based on the data we have, that the non-regulated part of the market is anywhere between 12,000 and 18,000 providers. Now, the reason why I'm giving a delta there is ultimately it depends on your definition of the aesthetics market. Now, so we understand that there is market opportunity, it's large, but how does that apply for my product? It's all very well telling me that there's a number of consumers that want to get treatment, but what does that mean for the products that I'm selling? And there are probably questions that you're thinking about on the call. Well, if you start looking at consumer demand, now this comes from our tracker service, consumer tracker service. This was from November last year. The latest wave is currently in field at the moment, so we'll have an update on this in May this year for those that you are subscribing. Is that we've got roughly 4 million who've had treatment, 2 million for botulinum toxin, 2 million have had laser hair removal, 1.8 medicated weight management of some kind, and dermal fillers around 1.6 million. In terms of those that would consider, now these are different. So this is the difference between those that have had something in the last 12 months. Those that would consider are those that would consider having something in the next 12 months. Now, we all know when they get into a clinical practice, they'll be consulted by the practitioner in terms of what is the right course of treatment for them. But what this does indicate is that there is some elasticity in terms of those that are having treatment and those that would consider having it. And it varies greatly according to different treatment types. So you'll see for fillers and toxin, it's around a quarter of those in the market between those that had and those that would consider. So there's still some capacity there in terms of increasing sales at a clinic level. But for laser hair removal, I was quite taken by this. It's 150% difference. It just shows that actually there's a number of people out there that would consider having it that aren't necessarily coming through a clinic door. So if you are a practice manager, or if you're working in an advisory capacity for anyone that's running a clinic, this is really useful information to know. And if you can understand this at a local area, you can better advise them in terms of what they can expect in terms of patient demand or consumer demand coming through the door. So it's really useful information to have. And we all know, many of you from manufacturers, obviously, you know, the success of a relationship often based on those interactions between your sales team, account managers, and the clinics themselves. So this sort of information is really quite invaluable. And why you need to know this ultimately is there a market appetite? And you know, do we have realistic targets that reflect the potential capacity within the market which we're targeting? Now, this will obviously vary according to around the UK, which I'll go on in a little bit more detail later on. So that's one particular pressure is, well, is there market capacity? The other is just thinking about, well, if I am working for brand X and I am looking to, you know, increase our market share, who am I competing with? So who else is out there that's got, you know, share of voice? And this is data from our clinic profiler. We look at the dimensions of brands from regulated clinics, and this is just regulated clinics only in this case. You can see Allergan's got 78% share of voice in the market. We've got Profiler at 23% and so on and so forth. But this is a real issue, and something to bear in mind is that this is ultimately a barrier to trial. You know, if you're looking to target particular accounts that are using competitor products, it's going to be a barrier to them using yours if that relationship is a good one and they're happy with the service they have. Of course, one way of thinking about it ultimately for those subscribers who use our data is, well, see where there's brands that aren't mentioned. That gives you potentially a bit of blue ocean. Maybe they're not necessarily so committed to using a particular brand and product to, you know, talk about it. Obviously you can't with POM, but certainly you can with medical devices. Represents an opportunity to have a conversation. In some cases, they will have kind of official partnerships and talk about the quality of the relationship they have, which indicates actually you've got a bit of a product trial issue. So for those that are subscribing to the data, it's just another way of looking at it, another way of cutting things out and approaching things. And we do have clients that say to us, you know, can we look at where competitor X is currently mentioned and targeted, because actually we know we've got a better product and we want to be quite aggressive with our sales approach. So you get some people that actually just lean into the headwind of it. So different ways of using the data. But certainly where brands mentioned that would represent potentially a bit of a barrier to trial. So we know we need to think about what healthcare professionals want. We know that it will vary by size, it will vary by motivation. And when we're thinking about our outreach, we've got to think about what's realistic. Where is the demand? Is there a sufficient demand for my product in the market, and where might that be? So the third principle I wanted to talk through was keeping on top of trends. It's quite a challenging, the notion of trends is quite a challenging thing for those of you that work in data and research, because you've just got loads of them, ultimately. There's loads of things you can uncover in the data, loads of potential things to be aware of. The way that we like to think of things here at Rare is we like to think of things in terms of more micro trends, because ultimately the top line figures that you see will often be reflected of a myriad of phenomena and patterns that are happening in the data underneath. So the best way of thinking about it is thinking about it in kind of a small scale. And that also enables you to think about what you can do, how you can change things. So keeping on top of trends is really important when thinking about how you can improve your sales lines. We mentioned earlier on about brand names and how that varies by clinic. And on this particular slide, I wanted to just show you changes we've seen in treatment demand at a patient level across the UK. Now, this is those that are considering having treatment. They haven't necessarily all had treatment yet, but they're those that are considering it. It's quite staggering to see that in a 6-month period between March and October last year, we saw a 5% increase in people who are thinking about having botulinum toxin treatment. That 5% change is representative of 700,000 people, which when you start to calculate, how much people would pay for treatment, it's a real significant number. You see a similar sort of pattern there for dermal filler, up 4%. Now, the hypothesis here is that ultimately this is post-COVID. With all the lockdowns we had, people are now out a bit more comfortable having treatment, etc. But what we see in our trackers that we've run over the past couple of years is there's always some fluctuation with treatment types, and often it will be at a local level as well, where there's been a lot of activity in terms of meeting that service demand, where there is demand for it at a regional level. So we see it varies quite a lot. But I guess to give you context, that 5% probably doesn't really mean much if you know where it's moving from and to, but that increase in demand for botulinum toxin is a shift from 30% of those who are considering treatment to 35%. And for dermal fillers, that's an increase from 23 to 27%. So they're not insignificant numbers at all. Now, this is important to be aware of. These changes in demand for treatments and how it's not uniform across the treatment lines is important for you when it comes to thinking about cross-selling, your NPD plans. It's important for those of you who've got multiple products in your portfolio is, well, where should we target? Actually, if we know that there's growth for this particular type of treatment and we can communicate about it, then this is something we can take to healthcare professionals who can use that knowledge as they see fit. So it really helps improve that quality relationship. As I mentioned, the important thing really is to look at, well, how do things vary at a more micro level? So we showed there that there's been an increase in those that would consider botulinum toxin. Now it's interesting how that splits by male and female. And I thought I'd show you here that 32% of those who are considering having botulinum toxin are males. And there's been a 2% increase in their demand over that time period. So there's movement for both genders. And interestingly, the East Midlands over that period saw a 6% increase for demand for botulinum toxin over that period too. So over-indexed versus 5. We're seeing that there's growth in all sorts of areas. You generally tend to see in private healthcare that there's lots of activity. If I look at it, think of it in terms of, and that's one region down in London and the southeast, but increasingly we're seeing with different products and different treatment types that it does actually vary quite a bit around the country. So seeing this increase of 6% in the East Midlands is no real surprise to us. It's not always a domain of those in the southeast and London who are looking for these types of services at a macro level. So the importance here, and what I want everyone to take away from it is, be aware of local dynamics as you sit across your data that you've got, or your commercial information on sales lines, etc. It paints a part of a picture. It doesn't tell you the whole story. It tells you a little bit. So it's really important to be aware of those local dynamics and to just be mindful that not all areas of the UK are the same. There will be variation across cohorts, geographies, demographics, and so on. So we've covered quite a few principles so far. We've talked about the need to ensure that we understand healthcare professionals' needs, understand market capacity, think about micro trends. One of the we're doing a lot of work in this with different subscribers and clients of ours, which is combining data sources that exist. So in some instances, we'll have clients that will give us their sales information, which we combine into our products and kind of look at where they're not currently present and where their competitors are, so they get a sense of where they can really sort of push themselves in the market. And what I wanted to show you was combinations of how you've got all this information on product usage around the UK. Well, then what about considering what that local market looks like? We thought we'd just compare a couple of cities here. Now, I've chosen Bristol, that's where I'm based, and Chelmsford over in Essex, which is obviously associated with, particularly in aesthetics, quite a kind of key area. Now, these, in terms of size of these particular cities, there's quite a bit of a difference. There's 467,000 people in Bristol and 181,000 in Chelmsford. The number of registered aesthetics clinics is 47 in Bristol and 16 in Chelmsford. Now, the balance of non-regulated is quite different based on the data that we've got. You do see a bit of a reverse in that pattern there. But for today, I'll just talk to you about the regulated clinics. The average income, though, is quite different. Now, this is a really useful indicator. The average income value actually is a public figure that comes from the ONS. We append all our data with that information because it helps frame not just how much patient demand is there, but what's the total addressable market? How many people exist in a particular area, and what's their income as an indicator of whether they're willing, they'd be interested in having in treatment or not. It is part of the picture. And we're seeing in Bristol that the average income is quite a bit lower than it is in Chelmsford. There's a greater degree of deprivation in certain areas of Bristol. And so you can kind of look at this in terms of a people per clinic measure. It's a crude measure, but what it does, it gives you a sense of what is the demand in that area? Is there capacity for growth? And the delta difference between these two would suggest that actually, in terms of regulated clinics, there's more space potentially in Chelmsford for clinics to meet that demand, particularly given the number of non-regulated clinics that are there. And that's looking at things in very much a kind of economics view. Of course, that doesn't get into the particular types of services they offer. It's just looking at some key demographic data. But the point I wanted to make to everyone on the call today is, don't restrict yourself to the sales information you've got, and think about what is actually available to you from a public source. This comes from ONS. You can do the calculations quite easily. Obviously, the number of registered clinics is something we have internally here. But for those of you that are subscribing, you can append that information, be it through ourselves or internally, to give you that additional context to what that market demand might be. And the differences here are quite staggering. You've got a 19% in terms of average income between those two cities, and a difference of 14% in terms of people per clinic. Again, gives you an understanding. If you were to try and, try and approach certain types of clinics that are in, let's imagine, more rural areas where you've got less of a population, then realistically, you have to kind of reflect where your sales line is going to be affected by the local demand. We know most people will go to clinics that are within an hour's drive of them or an hour's commute. So it's really important to get an understanding when you're mapping commercially to work out, what's going to give me best bang for buck. I might be able to serve this particular clinic really well, but is this clinic actually has it got a sizable enough market? And what's realistic in terms of what they can achieve? And that's usually very helpful as well to help healthcare professionals understand that sort of level of information. So useful for taking a consultative approach to the sales process. So just for reference, again, depending on the level of subscription, you might have different points of access, but we are pulling 3 points of data in our database on contact information, business service information, and local catchment area information as well. So we've got data on demand for certain treatments, but we've also got information on what is the population size. So you can kind of work out, are we at capacity here in terms of that market potential? Actually, should we shift our efforts over here where there's a bit of capacity? So it's, again, taking a bit of an economic view, but it helps understand what is realistic within the areas around the UK. And then I just thought I'd put in here just an overview of what that data looks like. So you can see, you've got information there in terms of brands mentioned, the size of the clinics, their turnover, number of employees, and their contact information as well. So that's all in there for you. These slides will be shared at the end of the session. So obviously you've got some reference material that you might want to look at. But if I was to kind of leave you with any final thoughts, I think it's going back to the principles. How can we be useful to people? Hopefully with these webinars being useful to those that attend the calls, and conversely, you'd be being useful to healthcare professionals in terms of meeting the sort of needs that they have. The smaller they are, the more likely they're to be kind of more concerned with more patient-focused issues, such as legal requirements and so on. The larger you get, the bigger the commercial issues are, and therefore your pressures become more about patient acquisition. They become more about the commercial side of it, and ensuring that you're delivering a consistent service, given that your service is being offered by many practitioners under one room. Second point is, what's realistic in terms of market capacity? Is there space to grow? If so, where is that space to grow around the UK? When we think of trends, we have to think of things in a kind of micro trend fashion. So where is it that we're likely to see demand? Is it with particular cohorts? And finally, there's ways of stitching disparate data together internally. If you've got access to sales information, why not append it with ONS data? See realistically if you can identify any patterns that exist between your sales approach and levels of income, population, and depravity at certain districts. But also you can append consumer demand data over the top of that to give you a bit of a better view. So these are 4 tips, 4 things to think about. Hopefully some of it might be new. If not, some of it's probably a reminder of things you already know, but you've probably forgotten about. So hope that's been of use. So we're just going to open that up to a Q&A, see if there's any questions that have come through from people.
Oh, thanks, Ben. We've had a few questions come through, but like Ben said, if you've got any more, please send them through in the little Q&A box at the bottom of the bar. So we've had a few come through. One was, what countries are we currently running in, or is it just the UK?
At the moment, it's just UK.
Perfect. And
internationalization is like quite a complicated thing. So we're in the UK working with a couple of larger manufacturers, medium-sized, all range of different organisations that are using it. But for the moment, just UK.
Cool. And is there any plans to go look at internationalisation?
Yes, the challenge is always going to be language.
Yeah.
So I won't get too technical on it, but ultimately there's every country is different in terms of the regulatory frameworks and how it all works, but it's ultimately a language thing, because the way our system works is it's looking for key terms, key words. That's how the scanner works. So it's about finding what you call the folksonomy of that market. So how do people talk about it, particularly in aesthetics? Now with non-aesthetics treatments, more traditional, private healthcare things, it's slightly easier. Because you normally have quite a standard way that you would term things, but certainly in aesthetics, there's quite a lot of creative language used, as we all know. So it's about understanding what that means in that particular market.
Okay, great. So we have a second question that's asking about what products are captured.
What products? Oh God, there's like 430 in aesthetics currently. Maybe 450. It's quite a lot. There's about 120 brands that we're capturing. So that's God, you've put me on the spot with that one. I should know this off the top of my head. I should know this off the top of my head, shouldn't I? Yeah, there's it's a mixture of laser, filler, toxin, biostimulators. Blimey, yes, lots. I mean, if we can share this afterwards if anyone wants to look at a particular brand. I actually had a call with a client yesterday who was asking me to look for 5 brands, and I have to admit, I don't know if I haven't don't know if I know that one. And then I checked the data, and it turned out that we're tracking it in 136 clinics. It's like, oh yeah, no, we do have that. So it's quite a lot to keep on top of, but we're tracking outside of aesthetics as well. So we work with other businesses that work in private healthcare more generally that we're tracking. So if you're interested, depending on what you're interested in, we can share it with you.
Perfect. Cool. And then we have one about the non-CQC data that you mentioned earlier in the presentation, and just about what that kind of is starting to look like in terms of, is it made up of salons or spas? Do we have that information yet, or is that something that's still kind of like a work in progress?
We have, so the challenge with that is, it comes back to your definition. So we've got a full range of what we're calling, we're terming it beauty and wellness, because we feel like that's probably the best way of kind of terming it, rather than sort of non-regulated, because the language isn't particularly kind. So it's within that you have salons that are offering some device type treatments. So you've got those that are offering maybe doing a bit of laser, or they're doing a bit of more kind of beauty, you'd call it. So that and then that kind of extends into, like waxing and things like that. And that's kind of an edge over here. Then you've got this kind of middle tier, which is more associated with, again, traditional beauty, but they have different practitioners that come in on different days to do different types of treatments. And in there, you might see that you've got, in that case, I think there's quite a lot of mobile practitioners, particularly with injectables coming in. And on the other side, you've got those that lead, a little bit more kind of closer to what a regulated clinic looks like. So it's really varied. So when we've been asked this question constantly for about 2 years since the product's been up and running, and our response is always, well, it depends what you define as the market, because our pharmaceutical clients view it very differently to those who are in medical devices or in beauty. So we have to be, have to sort of get to the nub of, well, what are the markets you have access to, you're able to talk to, we're able to operate in, and then we work backwards from there. So, but in total, we've got on our database now over 80,000 providers, and that's from pharmacies, hospitals, GPs, clinics, and then these wellness and beauty providers. There's a lot, and it really depends again on what that definition is. So plenty to go at. Makes it quite challenging depending on the brief, but there we go.
Yeah. Perfect. And then just one final question, which is around sales data and whether we are capturing that as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's one that's a bit of a golden egg in aesthetics. So I've been asked quite a lot of times by many people about this and what mechanisms could work. So we don't, in the current data that I showed today, that doesn't reflect sales, that reflects mentions. We're actively speaking to third-party providers about integrating sales data into it. Now, we do this outside of aesthetics already. And what that enables us to do is look at, depending on the third-party provider, we can then model what the projected sales line is around the UK. So we can certainly give directional insight on that currently. Over the next 12 months, we'll be able to say, with a higher degree of certainty, this is what your market share is. So yeah, that's something that's been worked on in the background. One way clients do use it actually is to give us their sales data, who they're actively selling to, and we show them what their share of the market is based on that. And that's quite a useful, rough and ready way of doing it if people want to have access to that information now.
Okay, great. That's all the questions that we've got through for today's session. So we'll wrap it up here. Thank you everyone for joining. The webinar has been recorded, so you'll receive that following this along with the slides as well. And have a great rest of the day.
Great. Thank you very much. See you soon.